Welcome into another educational video for the International Wine and Food Society Birmingham chapter. We are your hosts, Drew and Drew. And today we are at the lovely Red or White here in Birmingham, Alabama, down in the Forest Park area of town. So a newer spot, and we're in what will be kind of the wine bar side, right? And the retail shop is just on the other side of us with an incredible selection with anything you could imagine, as well as something that I think is really cool, a pretty big commitment to Magnums, which is certainly unique to have the selection that they do, which, as you guys know and probably appreciate, Magnums age incredibly well because you got less oxygen to cork contact and all that good jazz. So anyway, if you haven't been in to check them out, please make sure you do that. And without further ado, this is a topic that you may be thinking, why has this come around in January? But we're focused on sparkling wine today, and one of the big things that we want to make sure to get across is sparkling wine is not just for celebration. It's not just for New Year's Eve.
Right.
It's for any day of the week, and it's really
for every day of the week.
It's for every day of the week, and it's for every budget as well.
Yeah,
We've got quite the range of stuff, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we kind of get into things. But today we're going to kind of do a tour across various regions, probably all of the major regions for sparkling wine production. And we're going to talk about a little bit of the production methods and, of course, some of the flavors and aromas and things that you would expect to find within each of these categories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Drew, and we're going to start by talking about production method, and in particular a term that we hear called méthode de champenoise, or the traditional style of making sparkling wine.
Right. So basically, we're not talking about Champagne, the region per se, here in this, as far as getting into the soil types or the weather or anything like that. This is definitely just the method of production in making what we consider, in a very general way, Champagne method. Now, we're also going to talk about some other methods to make sparkling wines at the end, but to appreciate those, I think you really have to appreciate the Champagne method and what we kind of associate with bubbles. But to his point, there are many different wines that come from different areas other than Champagne that make this method. They have to call it method champenoise. They can't call it champagne, just like we've talked about with AOCs of other types. Well, you can't call Burgundy or Chablis in Italy or anything like that, even if it's Chardonnay. So, for instance, we have a cava today, which is made in the Champagne method. Cava comes from Spain and uses different varietals, obviously, than you would see in Champagne. We've got our traditional Champagne, which we'll probably open up and drink a little bit of while we're talking about this. And then from California, again, rosé Champagne here, but made in the traditional method. Obviously, you don't have to make bubbles in this way, and we'll go into that. But to really kind of focus in on the Champagne method, if there's a big takeaway on Champagne method, it's that a secondary fermentation is going on in the bottle. Okay, so what do we mean by that? The wine, when they make their harvest, is made in a normal way, right? So the wine is made just like it would be if they were going to bottle it and sell it as a Chardonnay, a Pinot Noir, or Pinot Meunier. Those three varietals, by the way, are the traditional varietals used to make actual Champagne, and we might refer to those in this segment. But you can make bubbles out of any varietals you want to. So you make it the base wine is what we call that. Then they're going to put that base wine into an actual Champagne bottle. They're going to put some yeast and some sugar, what we call the liqueur de tirage. And this yeast and sugar goes into the bottle, and then they're going to put a cap on top of that bottle, like a bottle cap. What they didn't do is kind of invert it, and they're going to age this and let a secondary fermentation happen inside the bottle. So the yeast that they put in there is eating those sugars. As a byproduct, it's creating more alcohol. So normally when you put a base wine into the Champagne bottle to start with, you're talking about a wine that is low in alcohol, because you are going to gain about a percentage point or so in alcohol with the finished product. So you typically will have a lower alcohol wine that goes in there with high acid. And when you're going to get out is a wine or a Champagne that has got a little bit more alcohol in it. Anyways, that secondary fermentation, those yeasts are chewing those sugars, and they're doing two things. They're making that alcohol we just talked about, and the other byproduct is the carbon dioxide. This is true with all wines, and the difference here is because it's all sealed up, that carbon dioxide is being infused into the wine instead of dissipating into the air like it would if it was in a tank.
Sure.
So that's why when you're going to open this up later, you get that bubble, you get that carbonation. There's no forced carbonation here, it's being infused into the actual liquid. What also happens is those dead yeast cells are going to start to accumulate in the bottom. So they might have the wine kind of like this at first. It's going to start to create a layer here. They're going to turn that upside down, and they're going to go do a process called riddling. Riddling is when you're basically just turning this to kind of break up that sediment and get it down towards the bottle. Now, a lot of big champagne houses will have mechanized, called gyro pilots that will do this by, the 200 to 300 bottles. The traditional smaller boutique champagnes are still doing that by hand, and it's labor intensive. It's a labor of love, but one that's necessary. So after the fermentation, the second fermentation has undergone, and they know it's ready to go, then they're going to do a process called disgorgement. What they're going to do is they're going to take that bottle cap that's right here. They're going to invert it like this. All those dead yeast cells are going to go to the bottom. They're going to super freeze this, the neck of that cork, and then they're going to pop that bottle cap. And when they do it, there's an explosion. It comes out, all that yeast cells go with it. They immediately put what we call the liqueur d'exposition, which is a little bit of base wine and a little bit of sugar, and we'll come back to that, into that to fill that wine up, and then that's when they put the traditional, the cork on there. Let's find out what that looks like. We're going to show you how to open a bottle of champagne at the same time.
And one thing that I was going to mention while we're doing this is the thing that's so important to me about the méthode traditionnelle, be it a Cremant de Bourgogne, Cremant de Loire, Champagne, Cava,
other great styles.
Yeah, anything like that. The takeaway for me, by having that secondary fermentation in the bottle, you're getting lees contact. You're getting contact with yeast. So that's what gives, when you have champagne, you're noticing that kind of bready, yeasty component that happens because of that secondary fermentation in the bottle.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk about the tasting notes on some of these, and while they vary, of course, wildly, that is a very big takeaway. The other thing to kind of take away is when they're adding that sugar at the liqueur d'exposition stage, when they've blown that bottle cap off and put that in there, that's what's going to determine your sweetness or dryness level. Now, they might not add any sugar, and you're going to get what we call a brut nature or a zero dosage wine, which is bone dry. Mm-hmm. Or you're going to have a little bit added, and that would either make it a brut style or an extra dry or a demi-sec if it's really sweeter. But that is the stage of when they determine what style of wine am I making here, or what kinds of...
Without further ado, the most exciting part about bubbles is always opening it, because while we're saying that it's not only for celebrations, there is something undeniable about hearing that cork come out of a bottle of bubbles that just, you can't help but be happy. I mean, these are not fake smiles. I mean, it's just already an anticipation of what's about to come. So without further ado, we're going to start with champagne. And the one that we're tasting, that we're going to talk about right now, is the Biacarte Simone. This is their Brut Reserve. But again, there are hundreds of world-class champagnes out there. And what we're starting to see is champagne be at a more accessible price point. Now, that could, of course, change with tariffs and global situations, with global economies and whatnot. But, it used to be that champagne was, kind of 50s, 60s and up. We're starting to see those bottles in the high 30s, low 40s and stuff like that, which is great. So, first thing you're always going to want to do is there should be on the foil enclosure, should be some sort of tab or something somewhere where you can start getting that off. Now, the thing that I like to do, just because you never know how much pressure a bottle is under, is I always like to keep my thumb on the top while I pull down the side of the cage here, wire cage. Undo that. Just a habit I have, I kind of get my fingers in there and loosen it up just a little bit. Now here's the thing, here's where most people, they try to pull the cork out. You actually want to kind of pull the bottle down. So ideally you give a little bit of a twist. You don't want to hear a loud pop. Slowly twist down, and there you go. The reason that we do it nice and slow like that, twofold. One, safety first and foremost. But secondly, we don't want the beautiful liquid inside having a violent exit from the bottle and getting all over you, your guest, or your countertop. And then I usually just take the cork and
unless
kind of do this little thing
unless
here.
you've just won NASCAR or Formula One, don't shake the bottle before you open
Please
it.
don't shake the bottle. That's very dangerous.
Yeah.
So we're also drinking out of what would be considered traditional wine glasses. I really love to do this in particular with champagne, because you get you allow the wine to open up and breathe a little bit, and there's enough bubbles in here. Unless it takes you an hour to drink a glass, it's not going to go flat while you're drinking it.
No.
The only time you may see a little dissipation is if you have an older vintage champagne. By default, that's going to have fewer and smaller bubbles anyway. What we call the mousse is going to be a little finer. So Anyway, without further ado,
But the reason why why a lot of the wine trade prefer the regular glasses is that you can get your nose in there a lot more and get a lot more of the aromas. The oxygen is also going to open up this wine a lot faster and easier than in a traditional champagne flute. Those flutes are great, they're very celebratory looking, but really they only highlight the bubble aspect to make it look a little bit nicer.
right.
It doesn't enhance the wine. It's not like it's a glass that was designed to enhance flavor or aroma. It's really just to showcase the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
So.
So one thing, yes, cheers. One thing that we talked about it earlier, but I mean, you get it right off the bat is that yeasty, bready component. In particular, what I love is you get this beautiful, bready, yeasty aroma, but right alongside of it is this beautiful citrusy and fruity, like golden apples and kind of lemon zest thing going on.
So one thing that you might notice, and this would be true in Champagne, of course, but it would also be true in other areas, even Cava. You can have wines that, we'll designate a couple terms here, Blanc de Blanc and Blanc de Noir. So Blanc de Blanc means white of whites, and it just means that wine is made only with white skinned grapes. So in the case of Champagne, it would be only made with Chardonnay.
Right.
In the case of, other areas, it might have some other white grape varietals in it to make that bubble, but they will always be white grapes. And then Blanc de Noir is just the opposite. It's the white of blacks or red wines. So it would, in Champagne, be a combination potentially of Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. In other areas, it could be Grenache, it could be all kinds of things. But it is traditionally shown to be, with the Blanc de Blancs, you're typically going to have, like he said, a little bit more of that zesty character, a little bit of the brighter fruit, whereas Blanc de Noirs are going to have all the yeasty characteristics that you might have with that wine, but it's also going to have a little bit more of the red fruit component to it.
Yeah, like the strawberry, raspberry component, as opposed to apple and
Now,
citrus.
it is not going to look like a rosé. It looks just like this. It is just used, the grapes that they use are red grapes. There's no skin contact, which was what would give the wine color, and therefore the pinkness. Those are not going to have. Some of them might have a hue change, but not really. What we're talking about with rosés are champagnes that are made with grapes that have sat on those skins for a certain amount of time. Either they're doing that where they sit and let it macerate for a little while and get that color, or they're blending at some point white and red juice to make that rosé, which is perfectly acceptable and not bad. Very common in Champagne, actually, in other places, but it is not because it was just red-skinned grapes. They are letting that time sit on the skins to get the color.
And typically, if they were to do that, would that happen? That would go before the secondary ferment,
Yeah,
correct?
they
So
would-
basically, they would take finished Chardonnay, finished red wine, either just Pinot Noir, just
Right.
Pinot Meunier, a blend of both, whatever, and blend, and then go into bottle
And
for.
co-ferment. Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. I mean, right off the bat with the flavors that are going on that kind of come hand in hand, side by side with the aromas. The thing that I really love, Champagne in particular, is incredible because of the bubbles and the acid. It's fantastic with anything that's got a little bit of fat to it, any kind of creamy dishes, certainly creamier cheeses, but also anything spicy. So you can go anywhere from, a charcuterie board where you've got some rillettes and you've got some bries and some blues. You can go fried oysters, you can go oysters, you can go caviar. I think one of my favorite all-time pairings is fried chicken. Fried chicken, popcorn's another very classic kind of thing to do. But again, also the sushi route. You could go, a spicy sushi roll or something like that, or staying in that kind of Asian kind of category where you've got a lot of umami and salt on the palate. Anything that's like a pad thai or drunken noodles or anything like that, Champagne is going to be just an absolutely gorgeous pairing, as would any sparkling wine for that matter.
And kind of like what we were talking about before, in that it doesn't have to be for celebratory occasions only. It also doesn't have to be with fancy food. It goes great with all those things. But to his point, like fried chicken, again, chicken tenders and some a nice sauce, and Champagne's great with that. So don't just break this out on the special occasions. You can do other things. The one last kind of thing we'll touch on is some sparkling wines that you're very familiar with that aren't made in this same method. That doesn't mean that they're not superior wines or anything like that. It's just a different style of how they do it. And probably the most common one that you'll see is Prosecco. So this is from a grape called Calera. It comes from the Prosecco DOCG in Italy. And it undergoes a process that we call the Charmat method or transfer method. And what this is the wine is made the same at the very beginning. But instead of putting it into a champagne bottle and letting that secondary fermentation happen there, they put all the juice in a pressurized giant stainless steel tank,
A controlled environment.
and allow it all the juice to undergo that process in that larger format. And so what happens then is there's no forced carbonation either. It's the same thing. All that carbon dioxide that is made by that yeast cells are then going into the juice, so you get that same bubble kind of thing. Typically, it's a little bit less of a fine mousse that we were talking about.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Typically, when
Typically,
you do that,
it's spread out.
you get a smaller bubble, right?
You get a bigger bubble. So smaller bubble would be with champagne. Bigger bubble with Prosecco. Sometimes it's more noticeable than others. I've had some Proseccos that I poured right next to champagne, and it had almost a better mousse. So it kind of depends. But more importantly, instead of the lees being in contact with this amount of juice and in the bottle right here, all those lees are sinking to the bottom of the tank. And so what the juice that you're getting on the up top isn't going to be that bready, isn't going to be that kind of yeasty component. It's going to be a lot more citrusy and bright, which is why we use words with Prosecco like lemon lime or zesty or fresh.
Almost more of that kind of soda quality.
A little bit, yeah, exactly. So that's the reason, is because those lees are dropping to the bottom. Now you could have some like small batch Proseccos or some vintage Proseccos, really very good vineyard site Proseccos that have a little bit more of that creaminess. Typically it's because they're in smaller tanks, smaller vats, and those lees, as we call them, are getting a little bit more incorporated. You can also stir up the lees, what we call batonnage, and that makes a little bit more creamier finish at the end. The good news with Prosecco, because it's made in that way, it's almost kind of like turning on a spigot for the most part. You can kind of make it whenever you want to. They're all non-vintage for the most part, especially in the kind of bigger producers. Sure. And so you can have multiple releases throughout the year. It's not like a one and done thing like you would see with a bottle of fermented champagne.
And yeah, the other thing is, obviously it's a lot more cost effective to not have to pay somebody to go through, do Ritalin and all that stuff with disgorgements and second things like that. So
the bottling is very expensive, yeah.
So it's not that Prosecco needs to be looked at as being cheaper. It's just inherently, because of the process and the production, more of a value play.
It's a cheaper production method.
Yeah,
right, exactly. So yeah, and again, you can have really good Proseccos that are command high price as well. Those typically are going to match up, and same thing with Cava. Cava is typically very inexpensive, even though it's made in this method. Part of that has to do with the amount of Cava they make.
Sure.
Economy in Spain being very much a factor, but there's also some great Cavas like Raventos or others that hold up just as well with the most prestige champagnes, in my opinion.
And can be vintage specific as well.
Can be vintage specific, can be ageable, very much so. So it's not, don't think of it as a hierarchy of champagnes up here, Prosecco, Cava. It doesn't work like that. Champagne is most notable and most well known because of its history, its very limited amount, the prestige around it, but also they do at the very intro level all the things that are a little bit more nicer, a little bit more, they put more money into it basically. Sure. So, but yeah, those are really the two main production methods. You've got some other ones like forced carbonation, which you really just kind of see in the very, very cheap,
the big box
kind of stuff. Yeah, and I have a lot of times I'll have people going, I get a lot more of a headache with this than I do with regular bubbles. There's a reason why, kind of get what you pay for.
Right, sure.
But the champagne and the Charmat method are really the two most common that we see, in that no matter where we see it from, South Africa, Arizona, can be from all over the world. It's that method.
So basically, what I'm hearing, my takeaway is, I can drink multiple bottles of champagne and not get a hangover. Is what you're saying.
So long as you're drinking a lot of water at the same time, you're fine. But yeah, now look, that carbonation that's in the liquid does affect your body differently than say a regular bottle of wine, and you've probably all experienced that. But that can be a good thing or a bad thing. So just like as with everything wine related, in moderation. So.
Well, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully again we've instilled some desire and some passion to go out and grab some bubbles for every night of the week, at every price range, and every occasion, be it just the end of the day and we're having fried chicken for dinner, or a true celebration, birthdays, anniversaries. Again, enjoy bubbles, enjoy them responsibly, and if you haven't been to Red or White yet, please come by and check it out. Ask for Todd. He'll take you around. He'll pick you out something that you need and that can make your day or your evening better than it was going to be without it. Thank you.
See ya.